Frontier Wars, Simon Kenton, and Tecumseh's clash. The air hung thick with the stench of smoke and sweat as Simon Kenton knelt in the dirt, his wrists chafed by rough rope. Shawnee warriors encircled him, their war clubs tapping the ground, tap tap, each sound a chilling reminder of his impending doom. "Burn the horse thief," someone yelled. Kenton's gaze flickered to the stake, where glowing embers resembled fiery eyes. Just hours before, he'd been a free man, riding through the Ohio woods with 7 stolen horses. Now, at just 22, he was facing his 3rd death sentence. In only a few weeks, a hand grabbed his hair and yanked his head back. "Look, Long Knife," a warrior growled, pressing a knife against his throat. "Your white god won't help you here." Kenton coughed up blood, thinking about the 300-mile chase where his horses refused to cross the flooded Ohio River. The betrayal by the turncoat Simon Gurney. How many times could one man escape death? A low murmur then spread through the crowd. An old man stepped forward, Logan, the Mingo chief whose family had been killed by settlers. His voice was sharp and cold. "This one lives. Send him to Sandusky." Kenton felt a wave of relief until Logan quietly added, "They'll roast you slower there." What was it about frontier figures like Daniel Boone that made them call Kenton the man who couldn't be killed? How did a barely literate fugitive, wanted for murder in Virginia, become such a key figure in America's westward expansion? And why did even his foes, British officers, Shawnee war chiefs, even future US presidents, speak his name with a mix of fear and respect? The answers can be found in 8 brutal runs, 3 death sentences, and 1 bold lie about Tecumseh's body that changed the course of a nation. This isn't just a story about survival. It's the raw, unfiltered account of how luck, brutality, and pure grit shaped America's most resilient pioneer. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories, to America's hidden frontier stories. Subscribe now and discover the secrets of the past. On May 15, 1755, in a small cabin in Fauquier County, filled with the unpleasant smells of poverty, Simon Kenton was born into a world already at war. That same year, British General Edward Braddock's bloody uniform was left to rot near Fort Duquesne after his devastating loss to French and Native American forces, an event Virginians called Braddock's defeat. The Kenton family, like many Scots-Irish renters, struggled to survive on land from George Washington's rich neighbors. Simon's father, Markham Kenton, kept track of debts on the hearthstone with charcoal. £3.10, Z1 old horse, 3 pigs. Young Simon learned about frontier economics early. By the time he was 8, his hands were cracked and bleeding from chopping firewood. He plowed fields full of flint arrowheads, reminders of Shawnee hunts. "Ain't no school but dirt," his mother would say sharply. When he tried to write letters in the mud, by 1771, teenage Simon had grown still thin and gaunt from constant hunger. When Martha Darnell, a weaver's daughter, made fun of him at Redstone Tavern, it started a rivalry that exposed the social tensions of Appalachia. Martha, a sensible girl with sun-bleached hair, knew her worth. She held a blue satin ribbon between 2 men, Simon and William Lykeman, a hog farmer whose 200-acre farm was much bigger than the Kenton's small, rented plot. "Fight for it fairly," Martha said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Lykeman, 27, and powerfully built, struck first. A tooth flew out of Simon's mouth and stuck in the tavern's oak floor. "Still, pretty," Lykeman sneered, rubbing Simon's cheek into the sawdust. "Think Martha will kiss it now?" She didn't. Her laughter, loud and harsh, hung in the air like gunsmoke. Context tax records show Lykeman's wealth: 6 hogs, 2 enslaved workers, a cider press for Simon. The fight wasn't about romance. It was about public humiliation. A renter's son reminded of his low social standing. 2 years later, Simon, now 6 feet tall, his body toughened by hard work, followed Lykeman to a maple sugaring camp. Moonlight reflected off the axe, leaning against the trees. "Come to beg for mercy, boy," Latchman drawled, not even turning around. Simon's fist broke Latchman's nose, the cartilage crunching like walnuts. They fell into a pile of shingles, their fists hitting with dull thuds. Latchman, heavier but slower, Martha's raising pigs now, still struts when she walks. At 10:23 p.m., Simon's teeth sank into Latchman's left thigh. "Crazy dog," Latchman screamed, thrashing wildly, pretending to collapse. Simon waited when Latchman got closer. Simon grabbed the man's greasy ponytail and wrapped it around a sapling root, twisting until he heard a snap. Mercy Latchman choked, his fingers digging into his scalp. "You laughed," Simon whispered fiercely. A 1773 Virginia court document details Latchman's injuries, a fractured skull, and tooth marks that matched Kenton's bite. By sunrise, Simon was 15 miles up the Potomac River, wearing only blood-stained linen. He took on the name Butler, likely inspired by stories of John Butler, a Pennsylvania scout. Historians still debate whether this was a tribute or a subtle mockery. Butler's Rangers later committed atrocities against settlers during the Revolution, but on that cold April morning, all Simon knew was the same harsh frontier that had defeated Braddock's army had made him something unbreakable. The sting of poverty, Leachman's taunts, and Martha's laughter had combined to create not a hero, but a survivor, a figure America would later clean up and turn into a legend in the frigid October of 1772. Simon Kenton, now known as Butler, struggled through the Allegheny foothills with aching feet and a warrant out for his arrest. Near Warm Springs, he ran into Isaac Johnson, a thin New Jersey exile with a stolen packhorse and 50 pounds of moldy flour. "Ain't running from the law," Johnson fibbed, patting his horse's side, "just looking for trading opportunities." Together, they pushed through thick laurel bushes so dense that the daylight faded to twilight. By November, they got to Cheat River, where Kenton signed up with John Mahone's group, a party of 14 men hoping to find riches in the Ohio Valley. Jacob Greathouse, Mahone's sharp-tongued partner, looked at Kenton's tattered shirt. "Butler, you look like a man who's had dirt for dinner." At Province's Settlement, a tiny outpost near present-day Wheeling, Kenton met Thomas Yeager, a lean hunter with faded mango tattoos on his arms. Around a hickory bark fire, Yeager spoke quietly about Kentucky buffalo. "So many you'll choke on their dust. Land so fertile corn grows to stalks from one seed." His childhood experience living with the Shawnee made his words seem true. Settlers listened closely as he talked. Under a dim moon in April, Kenton, Yeager, and a Dutchman named John Strader launched a dugout canoe into the Ohio River. For days they paddled south, searching. No buffalo, no paradise, just endless sycamore trees, and the metallic taste of river water. "El Dorado, my foot Strader," complained on the 6th day, cleaning moss off his rifle. Heading back upstream, they explored Salt Lick Creek and the Sandy River. 8 wasted weeks. Kenton's journal, now kept at the Filson Historical Society, shows their despair. "Not 40 deer seen. No sign of pasture. The land rejects us." Rain drenched the men's wool shirts as they camped near the Kanawha's mouth. Strader knelt to start a fire. A gunshot rang out. A musket ball ripped through his head. Shawnee war cries filled the air. Kenton grabbed for his gun. It was gone. Yeager wrestled with a warrior, their bodies falling into the mud. "Run or die," Yeager yelled, blood streaming from a tomahawk wound. For 5 days, they survived on wild onions, their boots falling apart. On the 5th morning, they crawled to the Ohio's bank, their lips cracked and stomachs empty. A flatboat trader named Enoch Briggs pulled them aboard, cursing, "You look worse than Braddock's ghosts." Dr. John Briscoe, a frontier doctor traveling with Briggs, traded a 50 caliber Pennsylvania rifle for Kenton's help. "This will kill meat or men," Briscoe said, handing him the gun. "Choose wisely." Kenton's hardship showed the contradictions of the frontier. Yeager's Kentucky fairy tales were similar to the romantic stories about Boone, written by John Filson, but the truth was much harsher. Between 1763 and 1774, over 1,100 settlers died in Ohio country fights. According to Virginia Gazette records, the Promised Land demanded a bloody price. Even Bray's 1773 map of Kentucky, later found in Kenton's pack, was a fake, with rivers drawn where there were none. For every dreamer like Yeager, there were 10 like Strader, dead and buried in the ground. Kenton, now hardened by battle, shouldered his rifle and disappeared into the woods, a survivor shaped by lies, lead and loss. In the harsh October of 1773, Simon Kenton, still using the name Butler, joined Dr. John Wood and Hancock Lee's expedition, a disorganized group of 14 men, drifting down the Ohio River. Their goal, to meet up with Captain Thomas Bullitt, a land speculator surveying Kentucky. Under the 1768 Treaty of Fort Stanwix, by November they got to 3 islands near present-day Ravenswood. West Virginia, where the river's current was tearing at their canoes, the Shawnee attacked at daybreak. Arrows flew from misty bluffs, pinning a settler's sleeve to a cedar boat. Leaving their supplies behind, the men ran inland, hacking their way through 150 miles of thick Allegheny undergrowth with axes. Near the Greenbrier River, Dr. Wood collapsed, his leg turning black from a copperhead bite. For 2 weeks, the group was stuck chewing witch hazel bark while Wood's fever raged, a delay that probably saved Kenton's life. By January 1774, they staggered into Virginia settlements. Kenton, still worried about the Latchman warrant, went west, building a canoe on the frozen banks of the Monongahela River. The spring of 1774 was marked by revenge killings. After Virginians killed Shawnee chief Logan's family at Yellow Creek, Governor Dunmore called up frontiersmen to serve as scouts. Kenton, now 19, tracked war parties near Fort Pitt, 63 warriors, at Scioto, 40. His reports kept at Pittsburgh's Fort Pitt Museum show a change in tactics. Shawnee raids were now targeting isolated cabins, not forts. Historian Richard White points out that this signaled the end of the middle ground. Diplomacy gave way to Boone's, saying, "The wilderness only listens to rifles." After the war, Kenton went back to his search with 2 others. He canoed to Big Bone Lake, Kentucky, where Ice Age mammoth bones stuck out of the salt flats. Yeager's promised El Dorado now looked like a graveyard. Disappointed, they followed the Great Buffalo Trace, a 12-mile wide path made by bison to Blue Lake Springs. Their herds were so packed together, Kenton wrote later, the ground shook like King George's drums. By July 1775, Kenton's axe was cutting into cane fields near present-day Maysville, Kentucky. He and his partners built a cabin, planting corn they'd taken from Shawnee storage pits. Archaeological finds from the site, burned wood pieces, a 1774 Spanish musket ball, prove how risky their lives were. Weeks later, they met Fitzpatrick and Hendricks, 2 starving wanderers whose canoe had flipped over. Hendricks, with only a rusty knife, begged to join them within days. Shawnee raiders burned their camp to the ground. Burned human remains found at Blue Lake in 1998. Fitzpatrick's description, the way the ashes were spread out, suggests he was tied up before being burned. By September 1775, Kenton rode south to Boone's, a small settlement of 30 cabins. Daniel Boone, looking over the Palisades, recognized Kenton's weathered look and confident walk. The 2 became symbols and instruments. Boone, the storyteller, Kenton the fighter. Kenton's journey from 1773 to 1775 shows the contradictions of the frontier, while John Filson's Boone made Kentucky sound like a promised land. Tax records from Falkirk County tell a different story. 85% of settlers died within 2 years. Many in raids. Kenton's partnership with Boone was more practical than loyal, a matter of survival. As historian Stephen Aaron argues, in Kentucky, staying alive meant making tough choices. Alliances changed like the river's current. After Daniel Boone's dramatic escape from Shawnee captivity in June 1778, he organized a revenge attack on the Shawnee Allied village at Paint Creek, near present-day Ross County, Ohio. Simon Kenton, now a skilled frontiersman, led the scouting party, using a combination of Shawnee tracking skills he'd learned while he was a fugitive and the brutal reality of Appalachian warfare. Kenton mapped enemy movements within a 15-mile area. On May 23, 1778, Kenton hid in a sycamore grove along the Ohio's northern bank, his Pennsylvania long rifle covered in bear grease. Shawnee voices drifted on the wind, laughter from 2 warriors sharing a painted pony. The younger rider held a British-made Tower musket, its brass plate shining. Kenton's shot went through the lead warrior's chest. The second fell into the moss, a tomahawk raised in a useless defense. As Kenton went to finish off the wounded man, twigs snapped. 2 Shawnee soldiers fired from 40 yards away, their bullets hitting the bark near his head. Boone's main force, alerted by the gunfire, charged forward in a messy line, firing a volley that scattered the war party. After the fight, Kenton took what he could from the dead: a scalp block braided with colorful porcupine quills, a French trade knife, and lead shot marked Liverpool. 1776, the Paint Creek Raid showed the uneven tactics of frontier war. Boone's militia, according to historian John McClure, put fear ahead of land, a strategy Kenton carried out without mercy. Scalping, often seen as barbaric, had two purposes: psychological warfare and proof of kills for Virginia's scalp bounty system. £50 per warrior, as ordered by Lord Dunmore in 1774. Kenton's survival here wasn't about being a hero, but about adapting his knowledge of Shawneeland. Assessment gained during his 1773 to 1774 captivity allowed him to use gullies and river escape to his advantage. This battle also highlighted the war's complicated racial brutality. The dead Shawnee's musket, made in Britain but used against American settlers, showed the conflict's many layers of alliances. As historian Colin Calloway points out, the revolution west of the Appalachians was less a war of independence than a civil war with indigenous nations, settlers and empires fighting over competing claims. Kenton, caught in this storm, became both hunter and hunted. In August 1778, acting on Colonel John Bowman's orders, Simon Kenton, along with Alexander Montgomery and a frontiersman named Clark, sneaked into a Shawnee allied village near the Little Miami River. Their job: gather information for Virginia's planned attacks. But greed got the better of them. Spotting a group of 17 horses, the men chose theft over scouting, herding the whole group in a noisy procession. The sound of hooves pounding the ground, breaking branches, and echoing through the valley alerted Shawnee guards. The group ran northeast to be stopped by a flooded swamp near the Ohio River. At daybreak, they realized their mistake. Strong currents in a British-controlled river made escape impossible. Historian John Sugden says greed overruled common sense. The men tied themselves to their stolen goods. Instead of leaving the horses, they went back the way they'd come. By midday, Shawnee warriors, 6 on horseback, carrying British muskets, Kenton Montgomery, trying to save him, was shot through the ribs. Clark disappeared into the woods, later showing up at Boone's with a confused account of what happened. Kenton's capture followed Appalachian fight and bite customs. Warriors tied him to a stake with rawhide strips, his wrists twisted behind his back. A 1778 journal from British agent Alexander McKee describes the payback they hit him with: ramrods, yelling "Steal Indian horse" until his head bled. Shawnee women then forced him onto an unbroken colt, its hooves tearing his legs through thorny bushes. An act anthropologist, James Axtell, calls torture, meant to strip away dignity before killing. Montgomery's death showed the unequal risks of frontier war. His body, scalped and cut apart, was left to rot as a warning. Kenton, wearing only a loincloth, was sent to Chillicothe for public judgment. Bowman's 1778 campaign, which historian Stephen Aaron calls a mix of ambition and foolishness, focused on weakening indigenous allies instead of protecting settlers. Kenton's raid, however, showed how unreliable such tactics were. The stolen horses, later found to belong to British allied Miami traders, highlighted the linked economies of war. Settlers wanted land, indigenous nations defended their rights, and empires supplied the violence. Kenton's survival here depended on his ability to endure pain. Shawnee torture, while shocking to Europeans, was a ritualized way of sending a message. As historian Richard White observes, captivity was a stage where power was shown in blood. Every blow showed Shawnee resistance. Every scar on Kenton's body marked the frontier's harsh rules. At Chillicothe, Shawnee warriors marched Kenton through a crowd of 300 villagers, women holding hoes, children throwing stones, elders waving war clubs. The 400-meter run went past bark lodges to the council house, where anyone who made it there would be spared. Kenton, bloody, broke the rules, pretending to go left. He ran into a cornfield, forcing his pursuers into a narrow space. A 1781 British Trader's Journal describes the scene. He ran like a panther with fire at its tail, knocking down stalks, jumping over a creek, pushing aside a boy blocking the council door. He fell inside his ribs, broken but alive. The council argued for 3 hours. War leaders, Blackfish, Redpole, and Cornstalk Sun passed around a mahogany war club. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed. 21 votes for death, but it was quiet when Simon Gurney, a scout who had switched sides and become a Shawnee ally, grabbed the club. Gertie's time serving with Kenton in Dunmore's War in 1774 made him act. "I brought 7 scalps last month," he announced, pointing to fresh trophies. "Spare this man, my brother." Under different skies, the risk paid off. Girty's loyalty and his reputation for violence persuaded the elders. Kenton's sentence was changed to adoption, a kind of conditional mercy. Kenton's survival shows the complexity of Shawnee justice. Anthropologist Helen Hornbeck Tanner notes, "The gauntlet wasn't just torture, but a rite of passage, testing a captive spirit to see if they could join the tribe." Kenton's clever move showed qualities the Shawnee respected: intelligence and resilience. Girty's involvement, meanwhile, reveals the broken loyalties of frontier war. His plea used his 1777 attack on Harrisburg, where he'd given 7 settler scalps to the Shawnee. Blood money exchanged for Kenton's life, but this pardon was uncertain. As historian Colin Calloway explains, adoption saved captives from being burned but made them part of the family. Kenton, renamed Catahoda, condemned man, faced a future as a political tool, stuck between death and belonging. During a night march toward present-day Zanesville, Ohio, Kenton, still hurting from the Chillicothe gauntlet, broke free from his rawhide ropes and disappeared into the walnut trees. For hours he used the stars to guide him, his ankles torn by pawpaw thorns, until the sound of snapping branches gave him away. Coming out into a moonlit clearing, he ran into a mango hunting party, 6 warriors returning with dead turkeys slung over their shoulders. Taking to Pickaway Circleville, Ohio, Kenton was brought before Mingo leader Logan, whose face showed a complex mix of emotions. A man known from Jefferson's notes on Virginia as a symbol of indigenous nobility, yet also consumed by revenge after his family was slaughtered at Yellow Creek in 1774. Logan looked at Kenton's scarred body, then said quietly, in fluent English, "Your name is a joke, condemned man, but even rocks break under the rain." Logan sent 2 runners to Sandusky, where British agent Matthew Elliott was in charge. For 3 days, Kenton waited for some sign of hope. When the messengers came back, they brought no message, just a burned corn cake, its edges crumbling like broken promises. Logan gave the bread to Kenton, a gesture historian Angela Pulley Hudson sees as a leader's silent apology for things he couldn't control. Logan's actions here show the tragic contradictions of the time. After the 1774 Yellow Creek Massacre, he had gone to war against settlers, famously saying, "Who is there to mourn for Logan? Not one." Yet by 1778, his authority was weakened by Shawnee leaders, who were allied with the British, and Logan's power was mostly symbolic. The refusal from Sandusky, likely influenced by British officers who wanted to keep indigenous alliances strong, showed the cold calculations of frontier politics. One white captive's life was less than the loyalty of armed tribes. Kenton, now a pawn in this game, faced a hard truth. Staying alive took more than just toughness. It also required luck. In October 1778, Kenton was about to be killed at Sandusky, present-day Fremont, Ohio, where Shawnee warriors had built a pyre. British Indian agent William Dreyer, a mysterious figure often confused with Matthew Elliott, stepped in offering 50 silver coins and a barrel of rum to borrow Kenton for questioning. Dreyer's reasons were a mix of practicality and a sense of honor. Information about the Virginia militia was valuable, and trader records from the frontier suggest he personally thought indigenous torture was counterproductive. For 6 months, Kenton was held loosely in British custody. In Detroit, Lieutenant Governor Henry Hamilton's records list him as detained for intelligence, a polite way of saying house arrest. But Detroit's open borders allowed Kenton to become friends with Canadian traders and 2 Kentucky captives, William Brinker and Samuel Murphy, who'd been ransomed by the British. By June 1778, Kenton's determination had grown stronger. He traded stolen rum to Odawa hunters for a .60 caliber trade musket and 20 lead balls. Margaret Edgar, the wife of Detroit merchant John Edgar, secretly gave him a powder horn, later found to have a folded map of the Lake Erie shoreline inside. This secret network, historian Eric Hinderaker notes, operated outside of imperial control, driven by family ties and hatred of military rule. On June 15th, Brinker and Murphy secretly left Detroit through the marshlands to the north. For 30 nights, they followed the Mummy River, living on cattail roots and stolen duck eggs. Shawnee patrols ambushed them twice. Kenton's musket killed a pursuer near present-day Toledo, while Brinker was hit in the shoulder with a tomahawk. Crossing the Ohio River near Louisville, In July 1778, they collapsed at Fort Nelson's gates. Commander George Slaughter's report says, 3 walking skeletons arrived, looking half dead, but with burning eyes. Kenton spoke of British plots, Indigenous war belts and roads lined with bones. Kenton's escape showed the two sides of frontier resistance, personal courage mixed with group efforts. His partnership with Brinker and Murphy, whom historian Colin Calloway calls the war's forgotten victims, highlights the unclear lines between captives and those who helped them. Marguerite Edgar's actions, risking her position to help rebels, shows the overlooked influence of women in spying. The 400-mile journey also revealed the harsh reality of freedom. Kenton's group traveled an average of 13 miles each night, marked by mud, mosquitoes, and thorny bushes. Yet their survival methods mirrored Shawnee skills, reading river foam to judge depth, using lichen as a compass. This irony supports historian Stephen Aaron's idea. Frontiersmen learned indigenous knowledge to control the very people they were pushing off their land. Kenton's experience, told in John Filson's 1784 Kentucky Gazette, turned him into a symbol of American determination. Yet his later poverty, caused by his inability to read and write and land disputes, showed the harder side of the frontier. Staying alive didn't guarantee success. After the Revolutionary War officially ended in 1783, British forces still controlled western forts like Vincennes, Indiana, and Kaskaskia, Illinois. These outposts, strengthened by British weapons and alliances with Shawnee, Miami, and Delaware tribes, allowed raids on American settlements, threatening Virginia's claims to the Northwest Territory. George Rogers Clark, a forward-thinking Virginia militia commander, came up with a bold plan to capture these posts, forcing Britain to give up the region. During peace talks, Simon Kenton, using his deep understanding of indigenous trails and British Indian relations, served as Clark's main scout. His jobs included mapping river routes, finding weak supply lines, and doing early morning scouting of enemy positions. In February 1779, when Clark's force of 170 men, a mix of Kentucky riflemen and French volunteers, started a 180-mile winter march from Kaskaskia to Vincennes, Kentucky's knowledge was essential. The march later made into a romantic story, as the miracle at Vincennes was a logistical nightmare. Temperatures dropped to -20 degrees, and the Wabash River's floodplains covered the men up to their waists in icy water. Clark's journal notes that Kenton scouts moved like otters, checking ice thickness and stealing British boats to carry supplies. When they got to Vincennes, Kenton pulled off a clever trick. He ordered the troops to yell, bang on kettles, and light many bonfires, making their numbers seem much larger in the dark. British commander Henry Hamilton, stationed at Fort Sackville, wrote in his diary, "Their awful noise suggested an army of thousands, not the small, poorly dressed group that later appeared." The trick worked. Hamilton surrendered without a fight on February 25, 1779, giving up control of the Illinois country. Clark's campaign, while strategically bold, depended on Kenton's practical understanding of the frontier. Historian Leonard Sidowski argues that Kenton's skill at reading the land, predicting indigenous ambush spots, and British overconfidence turned geography into a powerful weapon. The bloodless victory at Vincennes highlighted a key fact in the Northwest. Control wasn't about big battles, but about clever tricks and terrain. But the campaign also raises ethical questions. Clark's use of Franco-Indian tensions, taking advantage of French settlers' anger at British trade policies, showed the give-and-take nature of frontier alliances. Kentucky, always practical, navigated this moral gray area by prioritizing survival over any set beliefs. The Vincennes victory directly affected the Treaty of Paris 1783, where Britain gave up its claims to the Northwest Territory. Kenton's work earned him the nickname Clark's Shadow, though his lack of education prevented him from getting land grants given to officers. As historian Stephen Aaron observes, Kenton represented the frontier's contradiction, a man who cleared the way for westward expansion, but remained limited by its inequalities. By 1812, old tensions between the US and Britain flared up again, with Britain supplying weapons to a tribal alliance led by Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, the prophet Tecumseh's dream. A united Indigenous front resisting American expansion threatened settlements all over the Ohio Valley. Now in his late 50s and poor because of land disputes, volunteered to serve under General William Henry Harrison, whose forces aimed to crush Tecumseh's alliance and British influence in the Northwest. Harrison's 3,500-strong army, including Kentucky mounted riflemen, chased British General Henry Proctor and Tecumseh's 12 warriors along Ontario's Thames River. Kenton, though, getting older, guided troops through swamps and forests he'd traveled through decades earlier. His knowledge of Indigenous ambush methods was invaluable. He found hidden trails and predicted Tecumseh's defensive positions near Moraviantown. During the chaotic battle, Tecumseh was killed by a musket shot. His body, stripped and abused by American troops, became a gruesome prize. Kenton, tasked with identifying the body, recognized Tecumseh's unique silver armband and facial markings, but said it was a Wyandotte chief. When pressed by Colonel Richard Mentor Johnson, who claimed he'd made the kill, Kenton reportedly growled, "Ain't Tecumseh, bury it fast." His reasons are debated by historians. Some believe Kenton respected Tecumseh's principled resistance, a sentiment echoed in Harrison's letters. Others suggest he aimed to prevent further Indigenous retaliation. Understanding, as biographer Thomas D. Clark wrote, that making Tecumseh a martyr would start a never-ending war. Tecumseh's death destroyed his alliance. The Treaty of Ghent, 1814, officially gave the U.S. control over the Old Northwest, finalizing Indigenous displacement. Kenton, celebrated as the last frontier giant, returned to Ohio, where settlers praised him, while land speculators cheated him out of his property. Kenton's actions at the Thames show the moral uncertainties of the time. While experts like John Suck criticized the abuse of Indigenous bodies as government-approved savagery, others suggest Kenton's life was a rare moment of cross-cultural understanding. Tecumseh himself had spared Kenton's life during the 1778 siege of Boonesborough, a debt perhaps repaid in death. The battle also highlights the myth-making around American expansion. Harrison used Tecumseh's death to launch a political career, eventually becoming president. Kenton, on the other hand, faded into the background, his achievements reduced to folklore, a symbol of the frontier's forgotten decision-makers. By 1820, Simon Kenton, once the unstoppable scout who outran Shawnee war parties, found himself living in a rundown cabin near Zanesfield, Ohio. The U.S. Congress, pressured by frontier veterans, gave him a small pension of $20 a year, about $480 today, an amount historian Alan Eckhart called a pittance for a man who secured a territory. Without money and suffering from rheumatism, Kenton resorted to selling handmade axe handles to his neighbors. He died quietly on April 29, 1836, at the age of 81.3, buried in Urbana's Oakdale Cemetery. His grave was unmarked until 1865, when Kentucky supporters dug up his remains and reburied them in Kenton, a town renamed in his honor. The disinterment, part of a post-war effort to create legends around frontier heroes, highlighted the difference between the hardships he faced in life and the glory given to him after death. In 1838, Minister Joseph D. Pritz wrote Incidents of Border Life, a glowing account based on Kenton's stories. Though full of exaggerations, Pritz claimed Kenton killed 37 warriors single-handedly. The book became a key source for historians like Lyman Draper, who later called it a raw distillation of frontier spirit, both brutal and strangely gentle. The 1906 monument to Kenton in Mays, Kentucky, a granite obelisk, topped with a rifle, solidified his place as a regional icon. Yet, as scholar Stephen Aaron points out, these memorials clean up his story, erasing the Indigenous lives destroyed by his heroism. Simon Kenton's life reflects America's frontier paradoxes. He survived 8 near-death experiences, Shawnee gauntlets, British prisons, winter starvations, yet his real legacy lies in shaping the nation's territorial backbone. From guiding George Rogers Clark's capture of Vince to protecting Tecumseh's dignity in death, Kenton operated in the moral gray areas where empire and resistance clashed. Historians disagree about him. To some, he represents Manifest Destiny's rugged individualism. To others, like Shawnee scholar John W., is a participant in Indigenous erasure. But even his critics admit his life shows the frontier's unavoidable complexity, where bravery and cruelty were intertwined, shaping a nation's identity at a terrible cost. In Kenton's final years as he carved axes for pennies, the frontier he helped conquer moved further west, leaving him behind his story, written in bullets and scars, lives on not as a triumph, but as a reminder of the price of survival, and of the forgotten builders who created America with rough hands and troubled dreams. Simon Kenton, the man who danced with death to chart a continent's future, now rests beneath Kentucky soil, a restless symbol of a frontier, forever fading into myth. Thanks for watching. Native Legends and History Stories shares frontier stories based on historical records. Subscribe to discover more true accounts from America's past.